The moment Karen screamed across the cul-de-sac, I knew peace had officially died in Westlake Pines. Maybe it had been on life support for a while, but her shriek was the plug being yanked out. I had barely wiped the motor oil off my arms when she came storming toward me, as if she had personally built the Constitution and I had violated every amendment in one afternoon. The Mustang sat behind me, sun bouncing off the newly polished corner of its hood. I had spent the entire morning restoring that single patch to its first glint of life. It was the first thing in months that made me feel like I wasn't drowning in job cuts, mortgage pressure, and the kind of loneliness that settles when you eat dinner standing over a sink because you can't be bothered to set a plate. That car was therapy, salvation, and trouble rolled into one stubborn hunk of metal. And at that exact moment, it became the match that lit Karen's personal crusade. She marched right up to the edge of my driveway, jaw clenched like she was chewing gravel. "What is this?" she snapped, as though the Mustang had appeared out of thin air. "What do you think you're doing with this thing here?" I blinked, mostly because I had no idea what thing she meant. My busted garage door, the open toolbox, my entire existence restoring a car, I said. "In my driveway." "The usual." Her eyes narrowed. "Not just any car. This car." There was a beat of silence where common sense should have entered the conversation. Instead, Karen stepped closer, heels clacking like she was announcing herself to the gods. "This car belongs to the HOA," she declared. "Or rather, it should. It is part of neighborhood aesthetic history, and you are in violation by claiming it." I laughed out loud. Could not help it. It just came out, sharp and surprised. "Ma'am, this car came from Old Man Rickman's barn. I hauled it out myself after his nephew told me to take whatever I wanted before they cleared the property." Karen planted her hands on her hips, which in Karen language meant she had ascended to her final form. "That is impossible. This Mustang is the same model I reported 15 years ago when someone abandoned one near the community center. This must be it." So now she believed cars reincarnated. "Karen," I said carefully, "this Mustang is older than our HOA charter." "Exactly," she said triumphantly. "And as such, it falls under legacy management ordinances." There were no legacy management ordinances. I knew that. You knew that. Everyone except Karen knew that. She made up rules the way kids make up stories, except nobody laughed afterward. But this time was different. This time, her eyes weren't just full of self-righteousness. They were full of desire. Want. Possession. Sensation. She wanted the Mustang. Not to protect it. Not to preserve it. To own it. And that made something hot stir in my chest. No one had owned anything of mine in years. Not my time, not my sanity, not my space. And they damn sure weren't going to own the one thing that made me feel alive again. "No," I said simply. No explanation. No apology. Karen's lips thinned. "I will be filing a formal complaint. Expect a notice by tomorrow." "Perfect," I said, grabbing a wrench and returning my focus to the engine. Because I was done letting Karen script my mornings. But she didn't leave. She stalked around the Mustang like a hawk circling prey. Her eyes scanned every dent and rusted line as if she were appraising a stolen artifact. Then she pointed at a spot on the rear bumper. "Right there. That scratch. The same scratch the abandoned car had. This is evidence." I stared at her. "Karen, that scratch looks like every scratch that has ever existed on a bumper. If I took a butter knife and closed my eyes, I could replicate it in 6 seconds." Her jaw twitched. She pulled out her phone. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Documenting this. For the board." Of course she was. She snapped photos from every angle. She even crouched down so close to the tire that I contemplated calling animal control in case she decided to claim the Mustang was a threat to neighborhood wildlife. Finally, she straightened, dusting off her skirt like she had just performed archaeological research. "This vehicle will be seized pending investigation." I burst out laughing again, louder this time. "Karen, the HOA does not have a police force." "We could," she said matter-of-factly. "Last month it nearly passed." "Nearly doesn't count." She glared at me with venomous indignation. Then she delivered her final blow before leaving. "This is not over." I believed her. Unfortunately, I spent the next few hours working on the Mustang, but every few minutes, I caught myself glancing down the street like Karen was some sort of suburban specter who might reappear with a clipboard and a medieval catapult. The quiet felt like a trap, and in our neighborhood, quiet usually meant Karen was brewing something catastrophic. When dusk approached, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Congratulations, the text read. You are now under formal review for property misuse and theft of communal assets. I stared at it. Then I stared at the Mustang. She was escalating. Fast. By the following morning, I stepped outside to find a printed notice taped to my mailbox with the kind of adhesive meant to withstand hurricanes. The heading was bold. Mandatory investigation proceedings regarding unauthorized vehicle possession. I read it twice, because it sounded like something out of a dystopian sitcom. The rest of the letter was even worse. Karen had drafted a 3-page complaint accusing me of everything from historical negligence to aesthetic sabotage. She even added a claim that the Mustang posed psychological harm to residents, particularly those with what she termed vintage anxiety. I had to sit down for that one. I wasn't the type to fight. Not really. I avoided conflict the same way I avoided kale, taxes, and exes. But something in me snapped as I reread the words unauthorized possession. That was more than petty. More than annoying. That was personal. So I went back to the Mustang, ran my hand along its battered frame, and made a decision. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. But not the way she expected. I spent that entire afternoon documenting everything. Receipts from Rickman's nephew. Photos of my own work. Timelines. Emails. Even the mud stains on my boots from dragging the Mustang out of the barn. I printed out HOA bylaws, highlighted sections, added notes. By the time sunset dyed the street gold, I had a folder thick enough to use as a blunt weapon. And right as I was about to head inside, a familiar shadow emerged across the street. Karen stood there holding a clipboard like she was hosting a press conference. I approached her slowly. Karen, I said, voice even. I think we need to talk. She sniffed. I have nothing to discuss with you until the board meets next Tuesday. Great, I said, because I do. And I stepped closer, letting the folder of evidence tilt just enough for her to see the mountains of paper inside. Her eyes widened. What is all that proof? I said. Proof the Mustang is mine. Proof you filed a false claim. Proof you fabricated HOA regulations. And most importantly, proof you tried to seize personal property without authority. Her face drained of color. That's absurd. What's absurd is you telling people the HOA nearly passed a neighborhood police force. It almost did. Karen. Fine, she snapped. It didn't. Yet. I took a slow breath. Karen, I'm done letting you bully people. Her nostrils flared. Bully, yes. Bully. You do it to everyone on this block. You find people for lawn gnomes. For kids' chalk drawings. For door wreaths that were too cheerful. You once wrote up Mrs. Lewis for having a mailbox that looked too friendly. It was unsettling, Karen insisted. It had a smiley sticker. Exactly. I rubbed my forehead. Look, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm letting you know that if you push this investigation, they'll escalate it to the regional HOA council. And they don't take kindly to fabricated ordinances. For the first time in the 5 years ID lived in Westlake Pines, Karen looked genuinely rattled. You wouldn't. Try me. Her lips trembled slightly. She clutched her clipboard like a life raft. This car is ruining the neighborhood aesthetic, she said weakly. Then we can discuss real regulations. Not imaginary ones. Silence wrapped around us like thick fog. And in that silence, something in Karen's expression shifted. Her face softened. Her shoulders drooped. For a brief moment, she looked human. Fallible. Small. Then, like a storm cloud regaining shape, she straightened. Very well, she said. Tuesday. Board meeting. Prepare yourself. She spun on her heel and walked away. But she was scared. She tried to hide it, but it was there. And that fear meant I had leverage. Finally, I returned to the Mustang and continued sanding the fender, each passing stroke easing the tension in my chest. What I didn't know then was that Tuesday would bring a battle bigger than I expected. Not because of the board, but because of what Karen was hiding. And I was about to discover it. I found out the truth 2 days before the board meeting. It started with a knock on my door late Sunday afternoon, the kind of hesitant, apologetic knock that didn't belong anywhere near Karen. If Karen ever knocked, it would sound like a SWAT team with caffeine addiction. So when I opened the door and saw Mrs. Lewis, our 80-year-old neighbor with the permanently startled expression and the world's most harmless mailbox, I knew something unusual was happening. She clutched a small envelope between her hands like it was a wounded bird. I'm so sorry to bother you, she said gently, but I thought you should see this. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note on scented stationery that smelled like potpourri and suffering. Dear residents, please remember that any tampering with HOA property is strictly prohibited. If you see suspicious activity surrounding the blue house with the rusted vehicle, notify me immediately. Karen, my jaw clenched. This was worse than just a complaint. She was rallying the neighborhood. She was building a case, painting me as some kind of suburban outlaw. Mrs. Lewis looked at me with worry softening her eyes. Dear, I know you're not doing anything wrong. But Karen, well, she's been on edge. More than usual. I sighed. When Karen was more than usual, the world should receive tornado warnings. Did she say why she's doing this? I asked. Mrs. Lewis hesitated. There was something in her hesitation, something heavy that made me straighten. I can't repeat everything, she whispered, but she said something about the car being personal. Personal? She nodded. And then, almost reluctantly, she added, she said it reminded her of something she lost. Or someone. A strange stillness seeped into the moment, the kind of quiet that makes a person feel like the ground under them has shifted ever so slightly, just enough to unsettle the bones. Thank you, I said softly. As she walked away, I stood there with the note in my hand, staring at the looping way Karen signed her name, like she thought each letter carried divine authority. What did she lose? And what did it have to do with my Mustang? I spent the evening thinking about it, pacing around the car, running my fingers over the rusted edges like the metal itself might whisper clues. The sun dipped beneath the rooftops, casting long shadows that wrapped around the Mustang like a blanket. I thought about Karen, her fixation, her desperation, the way she circled the car with a hunger that didn't feel like simple HOA obsession. Like she recognized it. Like it mattered. And for the first time since this feud began, a strange, unwelcome feeling seeped into my chest. Pity. Not much, just a drop, but enough to sting. The Mustang wasn't just an old machine. It had a past. Rickman's barn wasn't exactly a secure facility. Maybe someone else had once loved this car. Maybe Karen knew them, but that still didn't excuse her behavior. The next morning, tensions escalated. I walked out to find a bright orange temporary fence erected around my driveway, complete with a laminated sign that read, "Containment area for unauthorized structure review, do not cross." I stared at it. Blinked. Stared again. Karen. She had barricaded my property. I didn't touch anything. I just stood there in shock until my neighbor John stepped out of his house, shaking his head, coffee mug in hand. "She put that up at 6 in the morning, he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might summon her spirit. Didn't even ask anyone. She just started fencing like she was claiming territory for a new nation. I laughed, but it came out half hysterical. "Isn't this illegal?" "Absolutely," he said. "But it's Karen. She thinks the Geneva Convention applies to her gardening tools." I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone, and began filming everything. Not because I planned to post it, but because documentation had become my religion. Karen stepped outside moments later, as if my breathing had triggered her internal alarm. She strode toward me, wearing a beige blazer that looked like it had been ironed with the fury of 1,000 suns. "Please step back from the containment perimeter," she commanded. "Karen, this is my property. Not according to current review proceedings." "What proceedings?" "Mine. Of course." I exhaled slowly. "Karen, remove this fence. This is standard procedure." "Standard for who?" She hesitated. "For me." Before I could respond, a blue sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a county badge stepped out, adjusting his belt like he regretted every career choice that led him here. "Morning, folks," he said. "I'm here in response to a neighborhood dispute." Karen beamed like she'd just been crowned queen of petty bureaucracy. "Yes, officer. This individual is harboring a vehicle that is in question of communal ownership, and ma'am," the officer interrupted gently, looking at me instead. "You the homeowner?" "Yes." He nodded with relief, as if my sanity alone balanced out the situation. "Can you tell me what's going on?" Before I could speak, Karen cut in. "This car was abandoned 15 years ago. It matches the description of a vehicle recorded in HOA archives. Therefore, it belongs to the authority of ma'am," the officer said again, firmly this time. "HOA is not a governmental entity. They can settle disputes internally, but they can't seize property. And they definitely can't block a homeowner's driveway." Karen's expression twitched just barely, but the crack was there. "Officer," she said with strained politeness, "I have every right to establish a perimeter to protect potential evidence." The officer blinked. "Evidence of what?" Karen hesitated. This car. This car is connected to. She stopped. To what? I asked softly. Her jaw clenched. It's connected to a person who used to live here, she whispered. The officer turned to me, eyebrows raised. Do you know anything about that? I shook my head. I got the car from a barn. That's all. The officer nodded, then turned back to Karen. Ma'am, unless you have proof this car belongs to someone else, you can't claim it. And you can't build structures on someone else's land. Karen's facade wavered. She opened her mouth, closed it. Then, gripping her clipboard, she said, Fine. The board meeting will handle it. When the officer left, she stormed inside without another word, the door slamming hard enough to shake her wind chimes. I tore down the fence plank by plank, the plastic crackling under my hands, frustration boiling under my skin. By noon, I was exhausted. But the Mustang sat there, steady and silent, like it had weathered thousands of storms and wasn't fazed by this one. I wiped sweat from my forehead and leaned against the hood. Tuesday couldn't come fast enough. But fate wasn't waiting for Tuesday. That night, at nearly 11 p.m., I heard someone outside. Not footsteps. Not talking. Crying. Soft, ragged crying. I stepped out quietly, the porch light casting a warm glow onto the driveway. Karen sat on the curb across the street, her knees drawn up, her face buried in her hands. The sight hit me like a punch. Karen HOA, Karen was crying. I didn't move at first. Didn't know if I should. But something about the way her shoulders trembled made staying silent feel cruel. I walked over slowly and stopped a few feet away. Karen? She stiffened. Go away, she whispered. I sat on the curb anyway, leaving space between us. She didn't look at me, but she didn't leave either. Minutes passed. The night was warm. Crickets hummed. A distant car rumbled down the street. Finally, she spoke. That car. She whispered. That Mustang. Her voice cracked on the word Mustang. My brother. She continued. He had one just like it. Same year. Same rust on the bumper. Same dent on the left side. Same. She broke off, swallowing hard. He left home when he was 19. Said he'd come back after a road trip. He never did. Silence wrapped around us. The car was found later, abandoned near Sacramento, she said softly. Doors open. Keys inside. They never found him. Never found a trace. She wiped her eyes. When I saw your car, I thought. Her voice broke again. I thought maybe it was his. Maybe some part of him survived. My throat tightened. I had never seen this version of her, the version that wasn't armored by rules and clipboards and false authority. The version that was simply human and hurting. Karen sniffed, stood abruptly, and wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. The board meeting is still happening, she said, voice shaky but determined. I nodded. But for the first time, I didn't feel anger toward her. She walked back toward her house. Paused. I'm sorry for the fence, she said quietly. Then she disappeared inside. When I returned to my driveway, I stood beside the Mustang for a long time, staring at the faded paint, the worn leather seats visible through the window, the small memories trapped in every scratch and dent. Whose life had passed through this car? What stories were buried under its rust? And what did Karen see when she looked at it? By Tuesday morning, the neighborhood buzzed like a hive on the verge of chaos. Everyone knew. Everyone was waiting. The board meeting was held in the community's Centera beige, fluorescent-lit room that smelled like old carpet and desperation. I walked in with my folder. People whispered. Some nodded in encouragement. Some looked nervous. Some looked thrilled, like they were about to witness gladiator combat. Karen sat at the front table, stiff as a board, eyes swollen but jaw set. Her posture screamed, I will not break again. The board members, 3 retirees who took the role far too seriously, called the meeting to order. Item 1, the chairwoman said dryly, dispute over unauthorized vehicle possession. Karen stood. I stood. But this time, something was different. She didn't glare at me. She didn't posture. She didn't accuse. Her voice trembled slightly as she began. I filed this claim believing the vehicle in question might have belonged to my brother. Murmurs rippled through the room. Karen continued. I jumped to conclusions. I created rules that didn't exist. I overstepped my authority. And for that, I apologize. Gasps. Actual gasps. She turned toward me. I'm sorry. My chest tightened. The board asked a few questions. I presented my evidence. It took 10 minutes for them to conclude that the Mustang was unquestionably mine. Case closed. Meeting adjourned. People filtered out. Conversations buzzed. But Karen remained seated, her gaze fixed on the table. I approached her. Karen, I said softly, I didn't know about your brother. I'm sorry. She nodded slowly. If you ever want to check the car's VIN against old records, I can help, I offered. For the first time, she looked at me with something not sharp or bitter but grateful. Thank you, she whispered. We walked out of the center together, not friends, not enemies, but two people who had finally seen each other beyond the battlefield. The sun was setting, painting the street in warm orange light. The Mustang glowed softly in my driveway. Karen paused, staring at it with a mixture of sadness and peace. It's a beautiful car, she said quietly. Yeah, I replied. It really is. She nodded once, then turned and walked home. But something in the air felt settled. For the first time, Westlake Pines felt like it exhaled. And for the first time since I dragged that rusted beast out of Rickman's barn, I felt like the Mustang wasn't just mine. It was a bridge. A painful one. A messy one. But a bridge nonetheless. And the story wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The boardroom felt colder than it should have been, like the air itself was bracing for impact. Karen sat across from me, posture rigid, lips pressed so tight they nearly disappeared. The other board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly exhausted from being dragged into yet another of her crusades. But today was different. Today, I had the leverage Karen never saw coming. She didn't know that I knew. She didn't know that earlier that morning, Mrs. Lewis had pulled me aside. Hands trembling, voice low, the elderly woman confessed the truth about what Karen had been hiding behind her relentless need for control. She was weeks behind on her mortgage and fighting a losing battle to appear invincible. The HOA presidency wasn't power for her. It was a shield, a last piece of her identity she couldn't afford to lose. And losing this Mustang fight meant losing the board's trust, which meant losing her last stronghold. I didn't plan to use that against her. Not directly. I wasn't cruel. But I wasn't about to let her bulldoze me either. It meant I finally understood the battlefield, and I knew where to step. When the meeting came to order, the first 15 minutes were the usual noise, legal phrasing, unneeded formalities, and Karen insisting this was a matter of community preservation. Then the chairwoman turned to me. You may respond now. I stood, opening my folder slowly, deliberately, letting the stack of evidence land on the table with a soft thud. The sound made Karen flinch. I walked them through everything. Photos, receipts, dates, Rickman's nephew's signed note. Clear, neat, undeniable. Karen's confidence wilted with every page I set down. Her face gradually reddened, eyes darting as if trying to find something to cling to. Finally she snapped. This car is dangerous, she blurted. It attracts the wrong kind of attention. It undermines the uniformity of the neighborhood. It emotionally destabilizes residents. Emotionally destabilizes, one board member repeated, blinking. Yes, Karen said. Some people are sensitive to vintage items. Another board member frowned. Karen, I've lived here 12 years. This is the first time I've ever heard of vintage sensitivity. Karen realized, too late, that she'd overplayed her hand. So I went for the final blow, but a soft one. I stepped forward. Karen, I said gently, this isn't about the Mustang. Her gaze snapped up, wary. You're fighting too hard. Harder than anyone would fight over a car that wasn't theirs. This isn't about aesthetics or rules. This is personal. And we all know it. The room fell silent. I watched her throat tighten, her eyes shimmer. For a moment I thought she might crack open, admit she was struggling, say something honest. But instead she went rigid. You don't know anything about me, she whispered. Maybe not, I said. But I know what it feels like to hold on to something because everything else is slipping. And I know this. Destroying someone else won't save you. Something broke in her expression then. Not rage. Not defeat. Fear. Real, unguarded fear. And for the first time, the board saw it. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Thank you, she said slowly. We've heard all sides. We'll take a vote. Karen's eyes widened. No, you can't. I haven't finished presenting my case. You presented it, the chairwoman said softly. And we've listened. The vote took all of 30 seconds. All opposed to Karen's claim? 5 hands rose. All in favor? Karen was the only one. It was over. Karen stood shakily, blinking fast as if trying to hold herself together by sheer force of will. Her clipboard wobbled in her hands. This board is compromised, she whispered. You're making a mistake. You're all making a massive. Her voice cracked. She turned away quickly, but not quick enough to hide the wetness in her eyes. She pushed past the table, past the board, past me, stumbling toward the exit. I didn't follow her. Some wounds weren't mine to look at. The chairwoman sighed, turning to me with a tired smile. Congratulations. The car is officially yours without restriction. I nodded, relief loosening every muscle in my body. But as I walked out into the cool evening air, the victory didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy, complicated, necessary, but not sweet. Karen stood alone on the sidewalk, hugging her clipboard to her chest. For the first time, she didn't look like a villain or a tyrant. She just looked lost, a collapsing person trying desperately not to collapse where anyone could see. She didn't speak when I approached, didn't glare, didn't bristle. She just stared at the pavement. I stopped beside her but gave her space. I'm not your enemy, I said quietly. She exhaled, shaky and thin. You took the only thing I had left, she whispered. The words hit harder than I expected. No, I said softly. I think life took things from you long before I showed up. But you can't keep taking things from others to fill that hole. It doesn't work. It just hurts everyone around you, including you. Karen blinked, swallowing hard. I don't know how to stop, she whispered. Maybe start by not fighting battles you don't need to fight, I said. And maybe talk to someone. You don't have to do everything alone. She let out a trembling breath. I'm not used to losing. I know, I said. But sometimes losing is the only thing that makes room for something better. She didn't answer. But she didn't walk away either. That was enough. When I finally got home, the Mustang sat in the driveway catching the amber glow of the streetlights. The metal looked warmer somehow, like the car itself was breathing easier. I placed one hand on the hood. We made it, old girl. The engine gave a soft creak as if agreeing. In the days that followed, things changed in small but noticeable ways. Karen stopped patrolling the neighborhood with a flashlight at dawn. She stopped taping notices on mailboxes. And once, shockingly, I saw her sitting on her porch just watching the sunset, not judging it, not correcting it, just watching. Maybe she would never apologize. Maybe she would never fully change. But she had paused. And sometimes, a pause is the beginning of a turn. As for the Mustang, I finished restoring it by early fall. Fresh paint, new chrome, rebuilt engine that purred like a promise. The first time it roared down the highway, wind slicing past the windows, I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not vengeance. Freedom. A freedom no one, not even an HOA president named Karen, could take away. And in the rearview mirror, the neighborhood shrank into the distance, quiet now, finally at peace. The Mustang gleamed brighter as the miles rolled on, alive again. And so was I. Thank you for listening to the stories on my channel. Please give me a like and subscribe to receive notifications about the latest videos.